Lord.
Praise you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Just to dispel any rumors that you've heard, I'm going to tell you something. I love you. Now, sometimes the rector needs to say that to the congregation because sometimes we doubt. Sometimes we're afraid that nobody loves us, right? And we need to know that somebody that's supposedly our spiritual leader loves us. So this is for you. I love you. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. We don't always agree. We don't always see eye to eye. We sometimes are going in different directions. But love is the essential quality that keeps the relationship of Christ and His church alive. Do not fear, only believe. Did y'all hear that a few seconds ago? Do not fear, only believe. This story that we read today has Jesus among a lot of people. He's always among a lot of people. He's on the water side, and he's doing what Jesus did, talking, healing, helping people into an understanding that they can have life, and they can have it in abundance, and they can live forever in the kingdom of heaven. And as he's moving through the crowds, the leader of the synagogue, Jairus by name, comes to him and says, falls to his knees, it says. He says repeatedly, "Master, my daughter is dying. Can you save her?" Now you can imagine that Jairus had consulted with lots of people before this, because in Mark's gospel, we know that it's the gospel of the messianic secret, where no matter what Jesus does, people don't ever seem to get it. And especially the leaders of the synagogue, the Jewish hierarchy. And yet in this occasion, you've got to believe that Jairus had reached the bottom of his rope. He could go no further. He could curl up into a fetal position and die, or he could seek a higher power. And he did. He sought Jesus. That's pretty good. That was a smart thing to do, don't you think? He went to Jesus. We got some other people coming. We'll all stand up and yell when they come in. What do y'all say? If you reach the bottom of your barrel, you can't go anywhere else. You got a choice. You can curl up in a fetal position. You can scream and holler. You can get mad at somebody. Or you can find a way to change your situation. And that's what Jairus did. He went to Jesus. And Jesus is filled with enough, don't you think? This huge crowd around him. He's trying to get the message across. And yet what does he do? He says, okay. And he just follows this man. Even though these people have scorned him over and over again, he gives of his life at a moment of great pressure. And he goes with them. And on the way, it says the crowds got bigger. They followed him. As you would imagine, Jesus is going and tell them to come in, Terry. Tell them to come on in. Just seeing them is distracting. No, outside. Terry, go outside and tell them to come in. Come on in. So here's the deal. That Jairus is leading them. Jesus is going. There's lots of people following them. And it says this woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years. You all know what a hemorrhage is? She's bleeding. And she can't quit bleeding, right? Now here's the story. In this story, you have to understand the Hebrew people. In the Hebrew world, a woman was only of value if she could have children. If she was married and had children. This woman couldn't have children because she had this continuous bleeding. So she was of no value at all. The other quality of the Hebrew laws were that if a woman was bleeding, she had to go into seclusion. She was quarantined from the rest of the community. So this woman spent 12 years in that state, a social outcast. She was able to go to the doctors, it says, and it said that she has been treated by many doctors, and everything was gone. Her livelihood, everything was gone. Now think about this. Do we ever have anything like that in our rich world? In the world that we live in, where we have an affluence, we all drove up here in a nice car, we can afford to eat tonight, we have shoes. I've seen people that had hundreds of pairs of shoes. If I ever get over 20, I'm going to have to quit. Do you think anybody ever has to endure that? I mean, we have doctors in our midst. Yes, I heard a report the other day on the radio, and it was a story about several people who had had some catastrophic illness. They had to go in for treatment, and the insurance wasn't enough. Well, thank God they had insurance, right? And then everything was gone, and they're in bankruptcy. This woman was like that, and she thought, if I just touch Jesus' garment, I'll be healed. I mean, that's an incredible idea, isn't it? I mean, that you can just touch somebody's garment and be healed. And once again, this woman was at the end of her rope. She had tried everything. The world had to offer her nothing of import. And what did she do? She turned to Jesus. That's a pretty good thing, you know. If you're at the bottom of your rope, you can't go any further. What do? You're in a darkness that doesn't seem to ever start. You look for the light, right? And that's Jesus. And this woman did, and she was healed immediately, it says. And Jesus was startled by this. I mean, he turned around and he looked. He said, "Who touched me?" And it says the apostles, who we just prayed that the church was built on the witness of the apostles and the prophets, right? They look at Jesus, and they had just missed the point. Remember, in the storm, they couldn't figure out who this was, and they say, "Lord, there's a whole bunch of people around you. Don't you think they're all touching you?" And he says, no, this is different. And he's saying it out loud, obviously, because the woman hears him, and the woman comes to him, and she kneels. Just like Jairus, she kneels. And she said, "It was me. I did it." And he said, "Woman, your faith has made you whole." Now, that's really important. This woman was hemorrhaging for 12 years. Nobody could help her. Do not fear, only believe. I have a friend that I met in prison, or he's dead now, and he was a golf pro. He drank himself out of every job he ever had. He told me that. And when I met him, he was a recovering alcoholic. And he told me, he said, "Steve, my life was in disarray." He said, "I was afraid, often afraid, that somebody would discover that I was inadequate, that I didn't have enough. I was always putting on a mask for everybody, and I drank to hide it. And eventually, it caught up to me." He said the courts got a hold of him, and after about the third or fourth incarceration, the judge said, "You're either going to prison or you can go to the Meninger's Clinic," which is a famous clinic up north in the Midwest. And they deal with addictions and other things, but addictions is one of their specialty. And he said, when I went there, I was mad, I was afraid, and I was at the bottom of my rope. Darkness had settled in. I didn't know if I'd ever get anywhere. And he said, the first night we had a meeting, and all of us were new. Every one of us were new people to this group. And this man walked in that changed my life forever. He said, look around you. Now, you can do that tonight. Look around you. Is there anybody look strange to you? Like strange, different? Some of you. Some of the people here look like terrorists. If you look around, there's some suspicious people here. Now, he said that to them. He said, and look around. He said, do you think you're like these other people? And of course they said, no. We're not like them. And he said that to them. He said, that's because everybody that comes into these groups, if you've ever been to an AA meeting, NA meeting, the first time someone goes, they look around and they say, I'm not like all these other people, right? Some of you deal with addiction. You don't know what I'm talking about. They look around, they say, no, I'm not like these people. He says, I'm going to tell you what, you're all like those. You're all like each other. You're exactly alike. You have a connection that's greater than anything. And he said, I know you think that I'm talking about addiction, and you're all addicts. You know, you wouldn't be here if you weren't, because the court sent you here. You messed up so many times, the court finally forced you to get help. So you're addicts, but that's not the reason you're all alike. There's been a study done, a great study, and after the study was finished, the conclusions were that all addicts come from families where touch is not an essential part of the relationship. And human touch is important. It's important to our livelihood. It's been proven that babies that are touched do better than babies that aren't. We need a hug, he said. And so he proceeded to teach him a hug, and I was with him when he was dying. He died of cirrhosis, as you would imagine, somebody a long life of drinking. Horrible death. Nobody was with him except for me. And he said, Steve, will you carry on my legacy? Will you tell this message that I got, that I share with every prisoner, every time he went into prison? And he taught a hugging exercise. He taught how there was the one side hug. You know, come on, Jason, you can help me. Jason's done this with me before. You do this is a little, what we call a one boober, right here, right there, okay? Now that's a safe hug, and then there's the tent hug right here. This is like when you're doing the peace over a pew, right? And then there's the man hug. We got the man hug. So you don't want anybody to be suspicious of you, right? Go sit down. And he said, and then he taught us the real hug, the hug that it means something. All those other hugs are defensive hugs. They continue to keep that facade, that shadow that keeps you safe. But what you really need is an embrace. And that's what Jesus wants to give us, an embrace. Do not fear, only believe. We mask our doubts, we mask our insecurities, and if we do it too much, we fall into a deep despair. The world is crazy out there. You know, we had a difficult week. I don't know if you've been paying attention or been asleep or under a rock, but you know that we had this horrible event in Charleston, South Carolina, which has been twisted and turned and spun, and you know, there's no words that are anywhere possible of dealing with this situation. No black, white issues, racial issues, the Confederate flag. And, you know, you see the response to the taking the flag down. Yesterday I saw flags flying, Confederate flags all over the place behind people's cars. Did y'all see that? You know, people going to Montgomery for a rally, I guess, to save the flag. Yay. Dixie, you know. It's a crazy world we live in, right? And I found out this week, I got a call Friday from my ex-business partner. He said, who was this guy you used to work with, that you worked for before we got together? And I told him. He said, look on the news. You heard about the shooting in Houston where the guy was at the business and someone had been fired and they came back with a weapon and he stood at the door, this young man, 40 years old, a year younger than my oldest child. It was my boss's son that got killed. He was a beautiful child. I remember him. He was little when I knew him. And he was only trying to protect others. And then, of course, we heard the reports from the courts. Some people are in great despair because of the reports. Others are excited, right? Some think the world is gone crazy, that the sky is falling. And the tendency when we get like that is just to curl up into a fetal position and go down into the depths of the darkness. The sky's not falling. Take a deep breath. Relax. It's not falling. The rest of this story that we read tonight, that Jesus is on this journey, he continues on the journey to Jairus' home. When he gets there, the people tell him that your daughter is dead. And Jesus said, why are y'all so dark? Why are you curled up in a fetal position? Why are you retreating into the darkness and weeping and all this stuff? This girl is not dead. She is only sleeping. And what does it say happened? Do you remember what happened? She said they laughed at him. Now, we're the church, right? We're the church. We're the body of Christ in the world. And we get a vision, right? We get a vision. I was with a woman that's dying this week, and she told me, I asked her, I said, you had any dreams, visions? She's not near death yet, but she's close. And she says to me, yes, I had a vision. Just the other day, I was in the midday, and all of a sudden everything got dark, and I saw a tunnel. And I said, was there a light in it? And she said, yes. I said, that's wonderful. Have you ever read stories like that? There's always in the midst of someone dying telling you they saw a light in a tunnel. I said, that's because you want to go to the light. And you're going to see more of that the closer you get. And that's good. That's really good news. And she smiled a big smile. She's not afraid. Do not be afraid. Only believe. This young child is only sleeping, and they laughed at Jesus. We get visions. We get visions of something we want to do, like build a building or, have a 5 o'clock service with a band and eventually get 30, 40 people there. Way to go, Catherine. We got them. There's 40 here tonight, I think. It started with a little dream, a little vision, and there were people that said, you can't do this. You can't do that. The world will tell you over and over again you can't do it. But if we believe, we can do anything. That's the good news. That's what Jesus says. But these people laughed at Jesus. So he just took the ones that believed with him, and he went inside, and he held the hand. Remember this, the woman touched Jesus, and in this story, Jesus touched the woman, right? They both had some connection, right? 12 years. The little girl was 12 years old. She got up, and he said, give her something to eat. 12 years. Pay attention to that, because in the Hebrew world, 12 was a whole number, right? That's you 12 apostles, the 12 tribes of Israel. Y'all get this? He made these women whole. I've always wondered about that, and I thought all week long, what is the significance there? Because I've preached this sermon before. But think of this. Think of both of these women as one woman. One 12 years old, about to become an adult, right? The other, the whole time, has had a hemorrhage of blood. In the Hebrew world, there was a covenant. We're a covenant people. You all know that. You remember that from your confirmation class. We're a covenant people. And the covenant began not with Abraham. It began with Noah. Remember that story? Remember the flood? Remember when Noah gets off the flood with his family? Everything's cozy. He's intact. He's been through the storms. He gets off on dry land. And all of a sudden, God says, I'm going to put my rainbow in the sky for you to remind you of my love for you. My love. Remember? I love you. Right? And I'm going to put my rainbow in the sky. And then here's what I want you to do. This is the payoff. I'm making a covenant to you. And a covenant is a relationship. It's not just a contract. It's not a written agreement. It's a relationship. And here's what I want from you. Be you fruitful and multiply. Right? You remember that? Be you fruitful and multiply. And then later on there's a covenant with Abraham. You remember what the covenant said? I'm going to make you the father of many nations. Because the Hebrews didn't really believe in the afterlife like we do. At least not then. They were still working it out. What they believed was that we live on in our progeny. That the more children we have, the more grandchildren we have, the more great-grandchildren, and so on, like Father Abraham, makes our life rich in the afterlife, right? These two women weren't going to get to experience that. Or if you look at it as one woman. The 12-year-old was about to become of fertility age, and the woman with the hemorrhages could not bear children because of her disease. Jesus touched them. And what happened? The possibilities were endless. Fertility once again became part of the story. That's our story. That's the good news. We can do anything we want to do. We don't need to be afraid. Do not be afraid. Only believe. The sky is not falling. The world is changing. Of course, it's always changing. Here's a really great story. I'm going to finish it up with this. We had an election yesterday of the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. I was just with the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church at Camp McDowell last Saturday. And she is a woman. Well, if she says she is a woman, of course. And when she was elected, there was this great outcry. The sky is falling. All the conservative people we're going to doom. We're going to hell. And they left. Many of them left, right? Well, years ago, back in the 1960s, or maybe back in the 1860s, right? There was the issue of race, slavery in the 1860s, and the church split. There was a whole time where they couldn't agree. They couldn't talk with one another. They were pounding each other like this. Later on in the 1960s, civil rights began, and then once again the church split. There was this clanging going on, right? And then we elected a woman presiding bishop, and once again the church split, right? The sky is falling. Yesterday we elected the first black African-American presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. And he's terrific. And you go look him up, Michael Curry, listen to him preach. The guy can preach like nobody I've ever heard. And he's going to lift our church up, and we're going to be better because of it. The sky's not falling. God's still in charge. That's the good news. Now, if you get confused, you get all worried, go to Jesus. That's really important, But here's another story. If you listen to the letter of Paul to the Corinthians, this is the second letter. The first one was all about love. You guys are all banging your heads together. If you want to get out of it, you need to learn to love one another, get back there. And then he finishes off with this second letter, and he tells them this is the essential ingredient if you want to get better. Give. Give. He even compares their giving to the Macedonians before this. He's saying the Macedonians gave a lot. What about you? You going to give? Are you going to make this happen? You're going to make your life change? Then give. Give of yourself, because that's the story today. Jesus, in the midst of these crowds pressing in on him, gives. He touches. He makes an embrace that changes lives forever. And fertility is once again possible. That's our story. Those with ears to hear, let them hear. Let's stand and say the historic creed of the church, the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God,